A few months ago, I reviewed a NVMe enclosure and dock from Yottamaster here, and I gave it a pretty good review. I actually liked it quite a bit. They reached out to me about a couple weeks ago and said they had a revised version of the same dock that actually has a fan implemented in it to help move air out of it. So other than that, it should be very straightforward. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to test it out, test all the ports, see if the speeds work as anticipated. It's a 10 gigabit enclosure, so we should be able to get good speeds out of an NVMe in there. We're not going to be getting, Thunderbolt 4, 3,500 megabytes a second speed, but we should get transfers that are around 1,000 megabytes a second, which is great if you're going to use it for, video editing, file transfers, and especially things like games, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be quite a good one, assuming that it works as anticipated. Yeah, that travel case, I forgot they sent that in the last one. That's really cool. Very neat. Oh, it's slightly different. So you get some goodie sections in there. This comes in a little goodie bag now. I feel like it's slightly different than last time, but looks good. So we get the carrying case here. It's actually a nice little case. You get a band in there to hold your NVMe enclosure, your USB dock, and then whatever else, your cables and other peripherals in that. So this is a nice little thing to add on, just a little additional goodie. USB-C that does 10 gigabit, so that's important. You're gonna need that. We'll look at the accessories first. So these are going to be to hook up your SSD, lock it down. Oh, there's 3 of them this time. And then you get some thermal pads here. You're going to put on the top or the bottom of your SSD. Over there. And then your heatsink. Oh yeah, I remember now. It had a nice copper heatsink on it. You're getting contact with that there from the NVMe, in theory, over the thermal pad. And that's going to pull heat away into this nice radiator style. And then this kind of sits in the bottom and you kind of pinch that in there. But if there's a fan also blowing over that, it should be even cooler. So we'll get that set up there. I have a couple different SSDs around me. And then I also have what's probably a bit of a hotter drive. So this is an SN810, not super hot, but this is a pretty fast Gen 4 drive. So we'll test both. One may run hotter than the other, so it's good to test more than one thing. So nice, same design as last time. It's got a nice build quality to it. This is like a metal band that goes around the outside. So it's not a cheap plastic or anything like that. That's good. Rubber feet on the bottom. And then on the top, you have the top there, which will come off. I'll do that in a sec. LAN, so that's your gigabit, that's your Ethernet port, RJ45, put that in there, we'll test that out. HDMI out for my screen, obviously. 5 gigabit port there, so that'll do 500 megabytes a second. 2 different USB-C ports. It does supply power delivery, 1,000 watts, so I can plug this into the wall, get 1,000 watts there, and then I can use PC, and that's going to give the data to my computer and also power it as well. So I have a 100-watt charger for that. That's the new vent that has been added in, and that's going to exhaust from there. And then on the other side here, we have even more ports. So we get TF, so micro SD card, SD card. We can test that, of course, I have those. 2 more USB-A. One of them is another 5 gigabit port, and one of them is a 10 gigabit port. 10 gigabit ports are good if you have something like an NVMe. This is a gaming NVMe enclosure here. Really actually quite fast, about 1,000 megabytes a second. But the star of the show, in my opinion, is an internal NVMe enclosure inside there. So, you put your NVMe right in here. Again, I have the heat sinks there. Kind of a spoiler when I showed that off. You put that in there, put everything back together, and then when you plug it in, you have basically internal SSDs. You don't need to mess around with anything. So this is the type dock. You could take it with you. And anytime you're doing video editing work, gaming, whatever you're trying to do, just plug this right into your computer. Immediately you have whatever SSDs inside of there, just hanging out. You don't need to have any other dongles on top of that. Okay, so we're gonna go, I think, with the SN810 because it's technically a hotter drive. I want to be able to show off the thermal improvements of that fan. That's basically going to blow air through here. So you're going to be, intake and exhaust probably out there, and then this kind of just sits down, so it'll come out of the sides there. But in theory, it'll be blowing cold air over these radiator vents here, and it should help evacuate some of that air out of there. So that's cool. Yeah, that's right. That goes in there. That's the downside there, yep. Get that into the locking, or the unlocking position, I guess I'd call it. Let's get that in there. And you lock it in, you turn it, so now it's locked in. It's good. This looks like it's going to rattle, but it's not once we're done with it. That actually works as a heatsink on the bottom, which is nice too. So we're going to get some heat off the back of the chip, because some of these do have heat from that direction. They put the thickest one on. They include 3. 3 of these little guys, but I put the thickest one. I don't know why, but whatever. Apparently I put on the thickest one. They have a thin one, a medium one, and a thick one. But that looks good. Good clearance on it. So then we'll be, I don't know if the air goes in or goes out, but whatever. There's going to be air running over this radiator here. So it actually should run pretty cool, all things considered. Let's start testing things now. So we're going to first plug in some power into it because it does have a 100-watt power delivery. So we're going to plug this in here. You can see there it says 100-watt power, so we're going to plug that in there. So this says PC in, so this goes there into the PC. And technically that SSD should pop up right away. And there's the SSD right there. I think I had an operating system on this before. Yeah, okay, looks like I did. Okay, so that's good. And we can hook up some other stuff too. We will just start plugging things as we go. So obviously visuals are a big one here. So we're going to plug in the 4K monitor there. I'll move this off to the side. There it is. I'll just extend it, I guess, for now. Very good. Okay, so let's see what we get for the refresh rate on the screen here. In theory, it should be 4K 60. So it's 4K 60, so perfect. Okay, and there we go. We're getting 938, basically exactly as anticipated, around 1,000 megabytes a second or so. That's perfect. So we're getting 10 gigabyte per second out of the internal SSD. It's a 10 gigabit per second port, so that's perfect. So that SSD is working perfectly fine. That's going to give us great speeds for things like video editing, data storage, working off of that SSD, just leaving it in there, just doing work. That's actually a good speed. People may think, oh, that's not very fast. That's twice the speed of one of these SATA SSDs. That's technically pretty fast. It's good. That's as fast as my drive goes. 380. That's actually faster than I thought. So that'll give you, 5 gigabit speed. So that's perfect. If you hooked up a SATA SSD here, you'd get a little bit faster, 450 up to 500. Never actually get 500, but that's technically the max speed of that port there. So that's good. And that should give us, in theory, I'll have to probably refresh this, that should give us 10 gigabyte per second. Okay, so that one is F, I suppose. We should be getting much faster speeds out of this because it's an NVMe, and that's a 10 gigabit USB-C. There it is, 934. So that 10 gigabit port is running at 10 gigabit. That 10 gigabit port, that's actually the built-in NVMe, is running at 10 gigabyte per second, which gives you about 1,000 megabytes a second or so. In theoreticals, that 5 gigabyte there is running at a good speed as well. And we'll do an Ethernet test real quick here, see what kind of speeds we get. Okay, right off the bat, we are getting gigabit Ethernet speeds. I have gigabit Ethernet, and I usually get about 930 megabytes a second, so it looks like it's right about there. You can see here that the Ethernet that's built in is very fast. I have gigabit Ethernet. This is the same speed that I get when I'm wired directly into my house. I usually get about 900 downloads and slightly faster uploads. That's, if you watch my other videos, this is about on par. And here's a look at the temperatures with this enclosure versus another one. So on the left here, we have the first runs that I did here using a different enclosure that didn't have a fan in it, just a basic NVMe enclosure. You can see here that the temperatures are fairly high here. We're getting up to 58 degrees on the drive temperature. I did decide to use a slightly different NVMe here. This is an SK Hynix P41, which is a very high-end NVMe. So you can see here, we're getting around 60 degrees pretty quick. This is the second run here, you can see. And then I put it back into the Yottamaster here, and you can see that it's running much, much cooler. Part of that is, it's just a larger device with a heatsink built into it, so it's just pulling off more heat in general. And then, of course, we have that fan evacuating a bit. So after the second run here, so definitely the larger device size here, and on top of that has the heatsink, and then also this fan here is keeping it cooler. And here's another extremely compelling use of a device like this. This is primarily how I'd be using it, to be honest. I have a MacBook. I can use it with my MacBook, or I can use it with, my Lenovo Legion or whatever. But, these have a lot of ports on them, my gaming laptop. So, but if you have a Lenovo Legion Go, or if you have a Steam Deck, or if you have an ROG Ally, your storage is limited to the SD card that's in the device and whatever SSD is built into it. You can add more or whatever, but you're still going to be limited to that there. You also don't have a lot of ports on them. The Legion Go does have 2, But the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally only have one singular port. So if you're charging, you can't hook anything else up. So you're going to need a dongle. I can plug this in here to my Lenovo Legion Go. I get immediate access to the storage there. So let's say I put in a 4 terabyte gaming drive in there, right? Like that's just a random drive. But I could come in here and I could hook up a gaming drive in here and get a ton more storage, right? Set this off to the side there, hook up your HDMI monitor. So then all of a sudden you have a big screen in front of you. You have your mouse and keyboard set up here. And then, one of the limitations of one of these devices here is you don't have a lot of storage. Well, I have potentially a 4 terabyte NVMe built in there. I could hook up other NVMe's if need be into this and get more storage. You have an active cooling on it. It has this radiator here, a heatsink that's going to be built in. It's going to radiate heat just as it is, just right off of that SSD, keep it cooler. But of course, then you also have the active cooling built in with that fan. This is going to be perfect for me because when I'm doing testing for my videos, game testing and that, plugging in stuff into my Lenovo Legion Go, I don't have to rely on these stupid things all the time and have all this random stuff plugged in. I can actually just take this with me, put my games on here, plug it in, and start testing right away. It's going to be perfect for me. And some people who want to use it, for a desktop setup, it's going to be perfect for them as well. But for me, this is going to be an awesome testing device for, these handhelds that I use that have limited I/O. It's going to be great.